You're listening to the Sales Tax People podcast.
Before we get into it, you should know that upcoming is some pretty scary stuff. On today's episode, Paul, Parr, and Danny are diving into the most expensive mistakes business owners don't even know they're making, sales tax compliance gaps that are silently building massive financial exposure. They talk about why tools like Avalara and Shopify Tax are only as good as the setup behind them, and how sometimes disconnected systems can file $0 returns while your actual sales tax obligations are piling up. They get into why over 95% of businesses they talk to have blind spots they've never caught, and how sometimes all you need is a second opinion. Without further ado, let's get into it.
We were just discussing some specific companies we're working with right now, just, new referrals that were sent to us, and companies that are just in a very challenging situation based on, some decisions that were made and some of the just processes that were in place, or, the lack thereof, right? Just issues that have come up because the right people were not involved in managing sales tax for companies. And so we'll call this a cautionary tale. There's so many variables to this, but we'll just start chipping away at it. And one story that comes to mind right away is one where here you have a family that started a company, and it's only about 4 years old. They hired a local CPA, just went through the process of looking at reviews and just trying to find the best person to manage their finances and their accounting. That, you could say, was going okay for a time, and then sales tax comes into play, and this particular advisor said, yeah, we need to get you registered in your home state and start filing returns. And then they knew enough to know that Nexus was being established in additional states. And so they turned on the tax collection for this Shopify store and started collecting tax. And over a period of time, they collected in about 30 states. Well, unfortunately, they took all of that tax and reported it to their home state. So again, like summarizing, you have a company that's registered in one state, their home state. They're filing a monthly return in that state. They knew enough to know that they had Nexus in 30 states, so turned on the tax in Shopify. So now they're collecting tax from customers in 30 states, and all that tax is being reported to one state. What are the problems with that?
Well, that's a cautionary tale indeed. Well, I think we all know the problem. You're collecting tax in jurisdictions that are going unremitted in those jurisdictions, and you're over remitting tax in a single jurisdiction where the tax is not due. The cautionary tale here is not this error, because we run into these types of errors all the time. The cautionary tale here is you believe that you had a system in place and that you were handling it and reporting it properly and managing compliance, because that's the world that you live in now, post-Wayfair, but it wasn't being handled correctly at all. So you don't get registered in those other states where you have customers, where you're collecting tax from them. You turn on the tax to collect it. Your CPA is advising you, and they're a trusted advisor. They may be familiar with the rules of Nexus and collection of tax. We haven't even talked about taxability, but it's just the mere process, right? Turn on tax. You're not registered. You're collecting tax from your customers in 30 different states where they're located. And you're taking all of those collections, and that tax can't go unremitted, so you remit it to the state where you're registered. So you have a huge compliance or exposure issue in 30 other states. I mean, are we talking about 7 figures here? Are we talking about 6 figures?
About $1 million
figures?
of tax.
Okay. So it's happened probably then over a couple of years. And this has just been happening, right? It's just regular routine. Every month we're collecting the tax. We look at the tax that's in our sales tax payable account. That needs to be cleared out. So we remit it to the state where we're registered, or our CPA is doing that. The CPA believes they're doing what they need to do to help this client be compliant. And the client believes that they're compliant across the board regarding sales tax. And all the while, over a couple of years, you run into this situation. Well, the only thing that you can do in that situation is, number one, hope that you catch it within a year or 2 or 3, because you're going to need to go get that tax back from the state. You're going to have to go to your home state and say, "Ooh, we have erroneously remitted tax to the wrong state." And then you're going to have to go to those other states, and you're probably, depending on the level of materiality, you're probably going to either need to register and get that tax remitted to the proper state. And you might need to participate in a voluntary disclosure program to try to avoid some of the penalty or interest that could go along with that unremitted tax that you collected. So yeah, it can create a pretty hairy scenario. On top of that, you might be talking about a company. I mean, we run into this all the time, who began a business, started a business, and now they want to sell that business. And if this is the situation that you find yourself in, you've got a lot of things to correct before you can sell that business as well.
Yeah. You talk about a cautionary tale, right? And there's two big things that come to mind for me when it comes to the cautionary tale. One is when you have a process in place and you have some sort of third-party advisor, be it a CPA, it could be us, right? It could be any type of like third-party provider, and getting that second opinion, especially as you're like launching a process or you've been in a process. And I constantly hear it on phone calls of like, oh yeah, this was set up 5 years ago and so was in charge of this, and I'm not certain it's set up correctly. Well, if you're not certain and you're not confident, and even if you are confident, why not achieve an added level of confidence by getting a second opinion? Right. It's, we love being that first, second opinion. And then there's the CPA piece, right? We have dozens and dozens. I mean, we really have hundreds of CPAs that we have worked with over the years. And they're great partners because most of them know that when they're doing anything outside of the state, or their clients are doing anything outside of their home state, it's like, look, I don't want to touch that. Let's, talk to a professional. Let's talk to an expert and an experienced advisor. And that's why we, have so many of those conversations. And so
Yeah.
the cautionary tale is both for the business owners and what's their process set up and how are things going there. And then it's a cautionary tale for the advisors to say, look, are you getting outside of your lane here? Are you swimming in waters that are not ideal for you? And I talk about that risk because there's enough volume here of dollars and materiality of costs that is going to be incurred by this company to actually clean this up, to where there might be some litigation, right? The client of the CPA against now their former CPA, of course. They're not their CPA anymore, so there's plenty of risk there. And there's also just that desire that most advisors have to really take good care of their client. And are you really taking the best care of your client?
This reminds me of an analogy that my brother-in-law just shared with me. It can be personal, it can be professional, it can be in all sorts of different pursuits, but sometimes where we find ourselves is in the deep end of the pool. And to stay above water, we have to tread water a lot. And as we tread water, we get tired, we get weary, right? And so one of the ways that you can overcome that is you can just sink, and you can feel a little bit of sensation of peace and relief from treading water, but we can't breathe underwater. So what we find ourselves doing is pushing ourselves back up and treading water. Well, the whole time that we're doing this, we're frustrated, we're getting tired, we're really weary. When we actually, if we were thinking clearly, clear-minded, we'd have just gotten out of the pool. Right? You don't have to stay there and tread water. And this analogy in this situation is just the struggle that companies face in dealing with sales tax when it's complex, it's confusing, they're not sure, they don't know. And the same with, as you pointed out, a trusted advisor who's familiar with it, and they agree to engage and help and assist, but they're really just treading water, right? And they just have these moments of needing to take a rest and then come back up and keep trying to do what they do. Well, you can just get out of the pool. You can go over and you can talk to the sales tax people, and you could just get an opinion, right? The reason I bring this up is this one specific example that you've shared happened just this week, right? You're having this conversation this week. They've been doing this for 2 or 3 years or however long it's been. And it was probably identified, understood with a possible resolution or approach to resolve this and correct it in less than 30 minutes. Meaning all they did was have a free call with someone on our team, right? We don't charge to talk to you. We really do want to hear what your situation, your system, your process, your approach is, who you're using, how you're remaining compliant. We just want to hear that so that we can identify if there are any blind spots that you should be aware of. And in the process of having these conversations, we can bring a lot of confidence and peace of mind about what should be happening and also identify remedies to help you achieve compliance if there's, heaven forbid, a situation like the one that you're expressing in play, right? But it takes less than 30 minutes to figure out what's going on and identify blind spots that might need to be corrected.
What's interesting about this one and what I find myself thinking about or considering is it better to collect the tax and not remit it? Or is it better to collect the tax and remit it to your home state? If you were to pick the lesser of, the lesser evil, I lean towards remitting it to your home state. At least it's tax that was collected and it's not on your books anymore. But when California comes knocking on an audit and they want their tax, they're not going to take too kindly that you gave it to Utah. Hey, these are California sales, California tax that was collected. It should be remitted to California. Yeah, sorry about that. I gave it to Utah. Well, you owe it here with penalty and interest because you didn't get it in 2024 like you sold it.
I don't know what the better answer is because when California comes knocking, I don't have it anymore.
Yeah. Now you got to go get it.
But is it still considered like a fraudulent penalty because it was tax collected, not remitted? Would California still impose a fraudulent penalty?
They may not care what you did with it, right?
Yeah, that's a good highlight here too, because there really are 3 calls that I've had in the last 2 days that are unique, but just generally speaking, it's this same position that they're in of I've collected tax and I haven't remitted it to the correct state, or I haven't remitted it at all, and it's immediately, like, without me even talking, like, these folks got on the call and already knew that, VDA, they were talking VDA, right? Voluntary Disclosure Agreement. And none of them knew that when you've collected that tax and you haven't remitted it correctly, a VDA is not necessarily going to wipe out the penalties, right? There are a lot of states, Paul, you and I discussed it this morning on a call, that there are several states that are still going to charge you a penalty because you did, in fact, collect the tax and didn't remit it. Like all things not all things, but a lot of things with sales tax, like there's kind of the pros and cons. There's the catch-22s of like, well, good, like at least you're not going to pay this tax out of pocket because you did, in fact, collect it. Oh, but we're going to go ahead and assess a penalty because you did, in fact, collect it and didn't remit it to us correctly.
Yeah. Share your scenario about some of the snafus you can run into with the changes in the marketplace with shopping carts and automated solution providers. Probably the biggest thing that you saw hit the market in the last year is just this shift with Avalara supporting Shopify on the back end and Shopify migrating out to having their own sales tax calculation solution. What are some hiccups that you can run into when you've got that scenario?
There's 3 that come to mind. One where they decided not to switch over to the new tool that is, the Avalara for Shopify tool, and someone went and just turned on Shopify, but they actually kept their agreement with Avalara to manage the return filing. And they did that without actually having the conversation with the Avalara team to make sure they put the connector in place. So picture, if you will, right? Like you have Avalara that was calculating the tax, which means the data's in Avalara, and Avalara is filing those returns. So it's all good, right? Like the tax collection's happening, the data's in Avalara, and those returns are being filed with that, tax that they collected. So they shut off the one piece that is, the AvaTax, right? They're no longer using AvaTax to calculate the tax. they turn on Shopify Tax, which can be a great tool for a lot of companies. We've talked about that before. And it
Sure.
can be a great way for companies to save money. So all the other kind of variables aside with those details, let's just look at it and say Shopify Tax is a great tool for them. The problem is they did not have a conversation with an advisor, and they didn't have a conversation with Avalara that says, okay, Avalara, you're still going to be filing our returns, but nobody told them that they need to make sure they get the connector in place. That's, probably $400 a year, but it's just the technology that's of course going to connect your Shopify data to the Avalara dashboard and actually push the data into your Avalara account. So now when Avalara goes to file those returns, there's actual, the tax collected there. So yet another issue of like the set and forget it is there's nobody on the Avalara's side that's looking at those returns and saying, hold on a second, we went from reporting $50,000 a month in tax to zero across 30 states. And there was nobody internally within the company that was monitoring it and looking at it closely enough, or even, had a clue. Like, and I don't mean that, to be degrading in any way. Like, there's just nobody paying attention to it. So the short of it is tax was still being collected through Shopify, but returns are just being filed at $0. So they're in a similar situation, right? But now you're talking about being registered in 30 plus states. You were filing tax, up to about a year ago. And now, you have a year where you haven't been actually reporting or remitting the tax that you've collected. And then it's actually yet another scenario where there's about $1 million of tax. And in this case, these guys have it, right? Hopefully they have it. Hopefully they haven't spent it all, right? In marketing efforts or buying
If they're
boats
accounting
and
for it
cars
properly,
and-
it's sitting in a sales tax payable account.
Yeah.
But not everybody does.
Yeah. So, I mean,
No, that's
that
rough.
touches
Yeah.
on that description of like just set and forget it, or having tools in place that are awesome tools. Like we talk
Yep.
about it constantly. Like Avalara
Great
has some
tools.
great tools. Shopify Tax is a great tool for a lot of companies. But even within that particular scenario, we just, again, in a 30-minute call, did some quick looking, and the nature of what these guys sell, there's some taxability issues. And they do not have it set up correctly in Shopify Tax or in Avalara. So now you just look at even like exposure, because they're talking about VDAs. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. First of all, you're registered in all these states. Is there a possibility the state would let you enter into a VDA? For sure. You could, try. But if you do that, now there's probably exposure there that you guys aren't aware of. Well, you're aware that there is some now because we're having conversations, but it's just, you can imagine like,
What's crazy is nobody in particular is at fault, right? You have the systems in place which you believe are managing the process properly. You've got tax calculations that are occurring. You've got collections that are happening. You've got the return filing and the remittances that are occurring, right? You've got a provider doing that, and so you feel like everything is moving forward as it should. And then to your point, a year later, you've got a significant amount of collected unremitted tax. You've got returns that have been filed. Thank goodness that the returns were filed, but they've been filed at $0. To your point, you could request a voluntary disclosure program to be in place to try to avoid penalties and maybe some interest on the remittances that you need to make to those states. But there's no guarantee that that they would allow you to do a VDA. So you may be paying all of this tax out of pocket. Well, not out of pocket, you have it at least, but you're paying it with penalty and interest because it's late. And nobody's at fault. And to your point, the last one is companies like Avalara don't take the responsibility for the tax codes or classifications of your goods and services that they're calculating tax on those transactions for. You may not have used an outside party to actually set that up. And so to your point, to add salt to the wound in this situation, is they could even though they're collecting all of this tax, they could be under collecting if they didn't set those tax codes up properly. But they also could be over collecting if those codes aren't set up correctly, because they could have goods and services that aren't taxable or that are taxed at a reduced rate. And so, the consistent process of periodically doing a nexus analysis and a taxability risk analysis on your transactions is so wise on a periodic basis. And also doing, a lot of times the conversations we're having are just like a diagnostic checkup, right? You can reach out to us, we can have a call, and we can just be doing a diagnostic checkup on your system to see if the system is functioning the way that it should, to ensure that you don't have any blind spots or exposure that's bubbling up over time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another piece of the cautionary tale that comes to mind that is worth highlighting is just this false confidence that business owners and management can have in their process. And namely, again, when you talk about having really good tools that are available to help you manage your sales tax, but then having someone in house even that is doing all sorts of accounting and finance for you, and you just say, oh well, here's a tool, like as long as I put that tool in place that's collecting the tax and filing the returns, like we're good. The problem oftentimes is you'll have someone doing things like, even this is something we run into often, where someone just goes and turns on the tax in a state and they don't even have Nexus, or they're looking at like a Nexus review, the nice like heat map that some of these tools will show you, or the alert that it gives you that says, hey, you have Nexus in this state. And they're like, oh, okay, we need to go register, or we need to go turn on the tax. So sometimes they turn on the tax, sometimes they don't know to register, right? And with these tools, I see it time and time again where they implement the tool and it says, oh, hey, you have Nexus in Arizona. But if you actually go and look into the details, it's from like sales revenue in 2022. And it's like, do you still have that kind of volume in Arizona? Like, do you even have Nexus at this point, right? There's so many details that can be addressed and really are worth addressing in, a 30-minute phone call.
Yeah.
That's going to at least uncover some of the details that are probably not being, addressed by your team internally, or even by your advisor that's, doing 100 other things for you. And they might be great at those other things. Like for me, a story that like sticks with me and that is very much applicable in my opinion here is something that comes to mind of like, this is not about Avalara. This is not about Shopify and like the issues they have. Like I've said before, and I'd say it again, like they're great tools as long as you know what to do to actually, build around those tools and all the like nuance and details that need to be addressed for those tools. And that's exactly it. Those tools are built not to give you advice, not to like give you the perfect solution for sales tax. They're there to actually help you, with your overall process. And the story that comes to mind is it's actually a really funny one, because it's been long enough that, the drama around it, the pain around it has subsided. And that's one where I went to pick up some food for my family and I ordered some fries for my wife. She's like, I want some fries. So this
snap,
place,
I've heard this story.
yeah, here we go, right? There were like 3 different types of seasoning that you could get on these fries, right? And I really just ordered them like, oh, that sounds pretty good. Like I'll get that seasoning, and keeping in mind, like these fries are for my wife. So I get the food, go, take the food to my family, and my wife's just not happy. And we, get right down to it. And it's like, she's not happy with the fries that I ordered for her and the seasoning that I got on the fries. And I absolutely knew better than to like get that seasoning. And the problem is she said, look, this isn't about the fries. It's about the fact that you like didn't consider enough of like what I wanted or what I needed. In this case, like what I wanted, like there's no way, like, I would never order this type of fry, right? This type of seasoning on my fries. So it was the kind of the punchline is like, it's not about the fries, right? This particular cautionary tale in like this entire conversation is not about these tools and their problems. It's about the overall process that you have in place and whether or not you've actually got the best advice to handle your sales tax.
Listen, speaking of French
100%.
fries, Paul is on these types of calls every day, right? And I've joked a lot about, by the way, how was that segue? I'm not even going to talk about French fries, but speaking of French fries, I'm going to ask Paul a question.
The best. We like those.
Great segue. I was going to ask you who
speaking
has
of
the best
sales
French
tax,
fries, but don't
I
worry about
really
that.
like this Liquid Death severed lime drink, guys.
Bam.
Sponsored by Liquid Death. Okay, keep going.
Every day he's on calls like this. Out of every 10 calls, Paul, how many calls can you confidently say to the company or to the person that you're speaking with, you guys are set. Everything looks good. Well,
I
at
don't
least
know
one.
that I would say any calls go that way.
Oh no.
It's less than one that they're like
Yeah.
100% set.
It's very, very rare.
Okay, out of 100 calls, is there at least one? Like, I want to give people hope out there. Like they've got systems and processes in place, and sometimes we talk to them and we say, you know what, you've got nothing to worry about. Maybe we say you got nothing to worry about right now, but maybe as you expand or grow or move into other jurisdictions, maybe 1 to 5 out of 100. Then is it 1 to
Yeah, I would say
5%
it's
of the
less
people
than
we talk
5.
to?
Yeah, for sure. Of 100, it's not very many.
A lot of
Where
blind
you're
spots.
talking with a client that they're not compliant in all the jurisdictions. They added new SKUs or products, or they expanded their service offering, or they just are doing more and more things. Businesses are in. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to generate more profit, trying to generate more sales, trying to generate more revenue, right?
Yeah.
And they're not concerned about sales tax. And so, almost all businesses that we talk to are in one predicament or another where, hey, this thing just got flagged. I mean, even if you think about our current sales tax return clients that we're filing sales tax returns for on a monthly basis, we're reviewing the footprint, we're reviewing the transactions, we're reviewing what's going on, and yeah, I mean, there's constantly things that need to be adjusted, changed, updated, reviewed. It's a recurring thing. So I tell clients at minimum, on an annual basis, you ought to be looking at where you're filing, what your footprint is, and what changes have occurred, where you're filing, what returns you're filing, and consider whether you should close any of the sales tax accounts, whether you need to register in more sales tax accounts. And then, of course, considering the taxability of the products and services, hopefully you're managing that. If you don't have a system in place, a software engine in place, and hopefully you're watching that at least annually, if not more frequently. But
well, both of you are all on these types of calls pretty consistently. Give me what you think from the two of you is a percentage of conversations you have where the person is surprised at what's brought up or identified in the call versus people who might be reaching out because they've got some sort of a feeling or an inkling or they're aware of a concern in their system or process. What's the percentage of people who recognize something's not right, but they're not sure how to correct it versus people who you have a conversation with and they're actually surprised by the idea that they might have a responsibility in other states or
yeah, it's over 90% of calls. Again, like, north of 90 out of 100, right? We said, on that previous kind of question, it was at least 5, right? Like maybe around 5 that, kind of have everything buttoned up. And it's similarly, like even ones that have things more buttoned up, they still come to us with some type of issue, some type of question. And over 90% of the time, we are adding additional information or asking additional questions they haven't asked before and bringing up details that they've never considered before, never even heard of before. So in almost every case, we are providing value in that sense of, like, again, asking questions that haven't been asked before, bringing up details that they haven't considered before. And in fact, if you even look at let's call it, 5% or less of companies that we talk to, that we have the conversation and there aren't any surprises, and we can confidently say, like, you are in the absolute best place you could be with sales tax. I would put those people or those companies in one of two buckets. The one bucket that they're in is they've had good enough advice, smart enough people around them that have enough experience and expertise in sales tax to where they've had all the conversations they need to. They've asked all the questions. They've been asked all the questions, and they've answered all those and considered all these details. And then they've simply, that we're not saying they're in the absolute perfect place according to the state or in perfect compliance,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
they've got all the information they need to, and then they've decided to move forward a certain way that is most practical for their company. So that's really always the goal. Is, we've said this 100 times, find where compliance meets a practical approach for your company. So
Mhm.
that's one bucket, right, of those, 5% or less. The other bucket is they're a startup and they've just barely started selling. They registered in their home state. They know they're just selling widgets and they're taxable and they're collecting tax in their home state, and they don't have Nexus in any other states, right? That's usually, I'd say,
Yeah.
the two buckets that those companies fall into. Everybody
Gotcha.
else could benefit from a 30-minute conversation with an expert.
Gotcha. Wow.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. It's not unheard of. I would say it's more common for clients to be not surprised than to be completely in
Yeah.
compliance. So more, I mean, it's not
Yeah. What percentage of
rare.
people that we have conversations with know they have a problem?
That's what I'm saying, is that more clients are aware that they have a problem when they talk with us. Hey, we're aware that we have some issues and they need to be figured out. We believe they do to be in this range. And then when you dig in, it's, yeah, they're in that range or they're a little bit higher. Oh, that's not too surprising. But yeah, I think it's a big concern for clients to constantly consider ways in which to stay compliant and to be compliant across the board.
Well, then I guess what we would say from our perspective is, if you are sure that you have your sales tax systems and processes in place, or you are unsure whether you have them in place, we should talk.
Agree.
It ain't about the fries, guys. It's about knowing what sales tax is all about, right? It's not, you mentioned it a couple times, Parr, like it's not about, like, placing the blame on anyone per se. That's easy to do, but there's great tools, there's great people that are helping you internally. They just don't necessarily know where to look, what to ask, how to ask it. They just don't know the level of details that someone knows that's been doing it, 30 plus years. And it's just worth
Yep.
having that conversation, so you do absolutely know what is most correct, what to look for. And now you're taking a proactive approach to, fall into that one bucket that I mentioned of the companies that are in a good place. And that is, they've figured out what compliance means for them, and then they found a practical approach to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Speaking of French fries, we've had enough today. Let's shut it down. Go get some fries. Thanks for hanging out with us on the Sales Tax People podcast. If you want to talk about sales tax, or maybe you have an experience that goes along with something we talked about today, or maybe you just want to hear about how Paul's day is going, make sure you send us an email to podcast@sales.tax, or you can text us at 949-355-5098. See y'all again soon.